what we're here to do is to think about the ideas about how to improve research performance in your setting. And what I'm going to do is to contribute to your discussion by showing you some examples of what is done in other places, so that you can draw on those examples as a stimulus to generating ideas for you to operate with in your faculty. Because I've thought about it for a long time. I have collected ideas from a whole range of different sources, and I've put them together, and so this can be a resource for you to be thinking about. I think in yesterday's session we realized, with the 4 quadrants discussion, etc., that there is no simple one right answer to any of this. It's always a combination of things which you have to think about, you have to adjust for your circumstances. Why do you need to do that? Well, simply, every situation, every faculty of medicine in any university is going to be different to another one, because there are different people. There are different people with different skill sets, and so you have to draw on a whole range of potential strategies to use to make sure that that faculty works well. So my presentation today is going to be based on 2 major aspects. My presentation comes in basically 2 parts. The first part is to do with leadership and leaders. So really, in a sense, what I'm going to be doing in the first part of my talk this morning is talking about Adi, Yodi and Ari as representative leaders of the faculty. Okay? In the second part, I'm going to talk about something different, and that is the details of the example strategies that can be used, that can be implemented by these 3 people in your faculty. But the whole purpose of the morning is, when you go into discussing these issues amongst yourselves, is to find what are the things which they can do for you which would make your life better and easier to improve research performance. What stimulus can they give to you? And so we're looking for your ideas to come back to them, just as much as I'm presenting you with ideas about what leadership should be doing, etc. So in a sense, my talk is a very technical one. There's no great thinking going on behind all of this. It's just simply observations of what has worked elsewhere, what can work for you, and it's a matter of picking out which are the best strategies for you to use. And the workshop sessions afterwards will be your opportunity to think about those, talk amongst yourselves about those ideas, so that Adi can take them away and work them, see if they're feasible, challenge them, and develop a strategy for the faculty. Okay? So what I wanted to start off with was to tell you about a publication which I worked on, which was written as a typology of knowledge and skills requirements for effective research and innovation management. Very long title. What is a typology? A typology was really a documentation of everything we might know about what knowledge and skills are required for this exercise. So I sat down for quite some weeks and just thought about everything that I could think about in terms of leadership of research and innovation. And this paper, this chapter 3, appears in this document here. You can download that from the internet, from the OECD. I can talk to Adi and others about the site for that. And you can see the detail which has gone into that publication. I'm going to present some of that to you, but not all of it by any means, because it's quite a long paper, and as you'll see, there's a long list of things which can be done. And then, as I said earlier, the second part will talk about potential strategies, which I've found in the literature and so on and so forth. So knowledge and skills. There are different ways of thinking about this. We can think about it from a bottom-up perspective. In other words, what do we need to do? In order to improve research and innovation, what do we need to do? We need to develop the individuals to become leaders in research in a discipline area. And in a sense, that's what we've been discussing over the last 2 days. This is the process of building your capacity to do research, okay? And then what do you do from there? Well, you become an individual who becomes a leader of research generally in an institution. So you look at Yodi, Yadi, Ari, their careers. What have they done? Well, they've been developing their research in a discipline area and they've moved into the leadership role. So that's the bottom-up process. And as I say, there's a transition which comes at some point in your career between being a leader in a research discipline to become a leader of other people to support their research activity. Then there's the top-down issue. Now, what do we mean by top-down? Well, very simply, if you have a good innovation and research system in your country, then it will start with the government. So we need to develop individuals to become leaders of research, policy and administration at government levels. So the government has a significant influence over what you can do at your institution level. Very simply, by how many resources do they provide to the university to do this research activity. That's one of them, but there are several more. So these people, the top-down people, need to understand what is research. They need to understand the context of the research. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, what is the capacity of the institutions within the country to deliver research? And there are lots of contexts. The Indonesian context is different to the Australian, it's different to the UK, it's different to the US for very many reasons. But any leader of a government department which is concerned with research and innovation needs to understand the national context in the international environment. Because, as I said the other day, this is a competition. It's a competition between countries to get good research happening for your economy. Most importantly, I think these administrators need to understand what it is to be a researcher. What are the weaknesses, what are the challenges that researchers face on a daily basis? They're trying to achieve something which is new and intellectually stimulating, etc. So the government officials really need to understand that. The question that I have often expressed is how much understanding is there within the government of what is the research process? And unless you have people in that situation who are experienced researchers, then there won't be a full understanding in the government level. So what generally then happens is, of course, that the top-down will influence the bottom-up side of the equation. And the question is, how strong is this link here in terms of understanding of what research is about and how it's done? Okay, so having said all of that, what we'll be dealing with mostly is this side here. There's not a lot we can do about that side except to encourage the leaders of the university to encourage the government to have people with a full understanding who are operating in government circles, but also for the senior leaders to contribute to the government and its development of policy. So, leadership by government, what do? They provide national priorities and funding for research, innovation, etc., all of those things. So that's quite a simple thing. The comment was made just yesterday, I think, the level of support by government for research in Indonesia is very low compared to other countries internationally based on GDP. So that's a policy setting which you have to deal with. They provide funding mechanisms. I guess there are agencies in Indonesia that provide funding, run by the government. Is that correct? Yeah? Presumably they support collaboration. We heard of the NIH grants, I think, was it yesterday, talking about the combination of drug development with nanotechnology as a collaborating thing, stimulated by the NIH, the National Institutes of Health in the United States, putting a lot of money into that area. So that's an example. Commonly, research integrity, research ethics in many countries is set up by central agencies. Certainly in the United States, there are various government departments which have a strong interest in research ethics and integrity. In Australia we do as well, the UK, Europe, all of those countries do, and I'm sure you have them here. And then of course when you're expending government money, there's a whole lot of regulation which sits around that, and you have to do a lot of reporting. I understand you're in the reporting season at the moment, preparing big reports back to the government on expenditure and so forth. So these things are what has to happen. So this is leadership of research by the government. And finally, communication. So the government should be communicating with the institutions about what research is going on. Now, in terms of what can government do to improve your research performance, this is where we start to see what government can do to influence an institution's performance. There are a few examples that I found listed in the OECD in 2014. If we just have a look at the column here, this is in the policy area, funding, financial incentives and working conditions. The type of instrument which can be used there is fellowships, scholarships for foreign students and researchers, lead researcher positions. So these are some strategies which government agencies can put in place to help you develop a research profile in your institution. Degree recognition, so what's this this is referring to a government authorising institutions to accept people from other places with different degrees. And that can be a government control mechanism over standards and quality. So that's another lever. Social and cultural support, that is providing relocation assistance and information and grants for spouses and families. So these are things which governments can do to assist you to build research performance by allowing other people to come in and work with you. Particularly around visa and immigration policies, and then obviously creating an international environment. What are your ministers that are responsible for research, innovation, etc., what are they saying about your country's ability to deliver on research outcomes? There's just that atmosphere of enthusiasm, hopefully from government, to support what you're doing. So that's what leaders in government can do. So let's get down from the top-down government level to talk about leadership of research in institutions. Now, there's a very clear distinction here that I've made in this paper, which is we talk about leadership of research on the one hand, and we talk about leadership of researchers on the other. There are two distinct roles here. One is building the research effort, but the other one is helping the researchers do their work. So I make this distinction between just looking after the research effort itself and looking after the people that do the research. And that's where leadership becomes important at the institutional level. So what's necessary for a leader of a research institute, a leader of research in an institution? So here I'm going to be embarrassing Adi here, okay? Because you don't mind? Oh, great, okay. Because what I'm going to be talking about is really what she should be doing. Now, no doubt she's doing a lot of this, but is that true? Okay? Now, I'm not going to embarrass you by saying, do you do this or not? I'm just going to put up what I know, and you can be silent about whether it's happening or not. But these are just some ideas. And you can talk amongst yourselves later on about whether this is happening or not. So, the first thing is that the leaders need to be aware of what's going on. They need to be aware of the external settings in the environment, which is both what is the national government policy and what's happening internationally in research. What are the strategies that other places are putting in, or other institutions are putting in place to deliver research? Are they developing new strategies to encourage collaboration? If so, are we doing that, or are we not doing that? And if we're not doing it, do we need to change to do it? Because again, I'd say it is a competition between institutions. So the leaders need to be aware of what's happening in the environment. But they also need to know what's happening internally. And here I'm referring to what is have we got a map of the activity in the faculty? Do we know what everybody's doing? Do you have any idea what research projects are being conducted at the moment, and who's doing them, and who's talking to who, and who's collaborating with who? Because unless you know that activity, you really don't know what's happening, and you don't therefore know what is the best strategy to move the faculty forward. So getting an internal map of the faculty is important, and this will depend on the level of information that you have. There are many, well, not many, but there are some systems available for logging activity in universities, in creating databases of publications, for example, databases of grants that are held, databases of activity can be constructed, which allow you to interrogate the map of what the faculty is doing. Another aspect of all of this is what is the institutional governance of research. Have you got a strategy? And if you have a strategy, who was the one or who was the body which approved that strategy? I presume that the university has a research plan. Does the faculty have a research plan? How does that fit with the university's research plan? So is there a strategy? And that's a responsibility of the leader of the faculty to actually ask that question and to propose a strategy, to get feedback on the strategy before it's finalised, and then to implement a finalised strategy. And that's really dependent on people in the faculty office, asking the faculty to contribute to the development of a plan. And I think that's what you're doing through these workshops, is working up to that if you haven't already done it. Institutional governance, there should be some oversight of the effectiveness of operations. Now, this can happen at various levels. In just the context of the research activity, I presume that the university has a research committee. Yes? So the research committee should be drawing on the faculties to tell them about what's happening in research across the different faculties. And they should be monitoring the activity in a faculty against the faculty's strategic plan for research. So that should be happening. There's appointment of directors and senior managers. Who has the oversight of the quality of people that are being appointed into the faculty's research effort? Okay, quite often when professors are being appointed to a university, there's usually a very high level representation on the selection panel. When I say high level, I mean people at the highest levels of the university can come together on that selection panel to identify the best candidate for a professorial appointment, for example. I'm sure you follow those sorts of things. But that's important for the leaders to be available and to contribute to the selection of the stronger research performers in the faculty. Support from management to the governing body. What I mean here is the faculty needs to be in a position where it can report information to the university's most important committees. So the faculty needs information systems so that it can draw on that information to present to the university to show what the faculty is actually doing. Okay, planning. This is something which you'll be thinking about most of the time, I imagine. Planning, assessing the position and the context, developing a strategy and communicating that strategy. That's a lot of effort goes into those three little dot points there. It's not easy to develop a plan, but once you've got it there, you then have to monitor it, make sure it's working, and feedback and all that sort of thing. But also communicate the value of the plan and make sure that you stay with the principles that are elaborated within that plan. So the leaders of research in the institution must engage in planning. That's very essential. Sometimes, as a result of the plan, there needs to be implementation of a change process. Okay, and that might mean, as we discussed, I'll put it in as simple terms as I can. Yesterday or the day before we talked about you have academic departments within your faculty, but you want to collaborate more in research and make it multidisciplinary. So that might be your strategy going forward. So what's the best organisational structure and the staffing arrangement and the infrastructure distribution which would facilitate that strategy of more multidisciplinary research? And a very large example here might be for ARDI to convince the Dean that we need to change from a departmental structure to a research theme structure. That's what I mean by institutional change. That's a big change. That's not easy, and it takes time. And it might create more trouble for you than you really want. So you have to be cautious about it. There is a risk, okay? But there's always a risk in everything. We know that. So it's a matter of managing those risks. But that's what I mean by implementing institutional change. The third one is cultivating a research ethos, which we talked about at the last workshop. We talked about the issues around ethics, around research integrity. The leaders really must insist that everybody abides by the standards and principles and rules of research integrity and research ethics. And if there is a breakdown in any of those processes, then the leaders must take control of the situation very quickly. Otherwise, the respect for the leadership will diminish in the eyes of the people that are in the faculty. So that's a very important point here. So if you do have your codes of conduct and your research ethics processes, then it's important that the leaders are actually vocal in promoting and implementing those codes so that all the staff understand the principles and the values of the faculty towards strong research integrity. When you've got new people coming into the faculty, they need to be trained, they need to be inducted into the processes of research integrity, and the leaders must ensure that everybody understands that. Let me give you another example. As I've said, I sit on the governing body of a research institute in Australia, and every meeting of the board of that institute, we get a report on how many staff of the institute, and there are 800 staff in this institute, how many staff have not undertaken their required training and induction processes over the last 3 months. And we were very concerned at one point a year ago when we saw the numbers of people that were not going through their training program for workplace safety or another program on bullying in the workplace. Okay, they had not undertaken that training. There were too many people without having that training. And so the board discussed this with the director of the institute, and we talked about it for quite some time, and the board determined and asked the director and gave the director the encouragement to say to the staff, if you do not do this training within the next month, then your access card to enter the building will be disengaged. Pretty serious stuff. But when it comes to workplace safety, it's got to be serious. So that's how high it went up in the governance and management of the institution. So that's the responsibility of the leader, and that's why cultivating a sound research ethos, so I've just given you one example of that, that's what you've got to do sometimes. You've got to be tough to make sure that people meet the rules. And that's the role of a research leader. Okay, we've just talked about risks, and you need leaders of the research institution need to be prepared. They need to have identified and documented known risks and establish and communicate policies and procedures to deal with those risks. Do you have a research risk plan? You don't need to answer that. You don't? Okay, you don't have one. So, what? At the institution level or the faculty level? Institution level should build up from the lowest level anyway. So what I've seen happen is a requirement to construct a risk management plan for the institution, and what happens is that that information is sent out to each faculty, and each faculty is asked to identify what are the risks that they can identify in their faculty. And then the dean will send it down to the departments, and the departments are asked to do the same issue. And then gradually all of that information is then filtered back up to the top of the institution. And that you identify the major risks and you identify what needs to be done to mitigate those risks. Okay, so let's give you an example. Chemistry, there can be very dangerous chemicals floating around in a chemistry department. So what are the risks of something going wrong? Just the other night I was sitting in the restaurant at the hotel here and my chair started to move underneath me. This is only the second earth tremor that I've ever felt in my life. So it was a small one. I've just been looking at the data. It was 5.6 and it was 125 kilometres away and it was 77 kilometres down into the earth. But it still shook my chair and I was a little bit worried, not really, but I was concerned but not too worried. Okay, but clearly in your institution, if you get a big earthquake, what's going to happen in the chemistry school? Big dangerous chemicals could fall out of the cabinet onto the floor, smash, acid could go everywhere, etc., etc. Has that risk been identified? And are there strategies in place to deal with that risk? If there are not, then it's the responsibility of the leaders to make sure that those things are put in place. So that's what a leader has to do. That's just one example of a risk. There are any number of risks that you can imagine. Some of those risks are very low. Some of the consequences of those risks are also very low, and so they get a low rating. They are documented, but they're given a low rating. Normally what we do is build up a risk profile which says this is a very big risk. If that happens, then we're in very deep trouble, and we need policies and strategies to make sure that that risk doesn't eventuate, and if it does, what are we going to do about it? So you build up a profile of low risk up to high risk. And it's the responsibility, I believe, of the governing body to review that risk profile at least once a year, if not more often. And it's the responsibilities of leaders to get this list together. Clearly communication is important. The leaders must be communicating with the staff on a whole range of issues. Who should they be talking to? Well, clearly I've just said staff, but students, alumni, corporate partners, governments. You should be talking to Steve Yang on a very regular basis, for example. He's a contributor. He took the time out of his busy schedule to come and talk with us yesterday. He's obviously committed to the relationship with UGM. So he should be encouraged, and the communication is important. He should know what you're doing, and he should be given an opportunity to talk to you about what he's doing. So that good communication is important. Personal involvement, the leader must get personally involved in that communication. I think that's pretty obvious. Maintaining a public and international profile, well, these two people here at least, and I know Ari probably does as well, but these two people spend too much time in an aeroplane. Yes? Yes, of course they do. But that's important. I'm not saying that critically. It is true that they do that, but why do they do it? Because they're helping to maintain the public and international profile of the faculty and thereby the university. And that's what a leader's responsibility is, in part. Have you run out of energy yet? Have I told you too many things to do? No? Okay. And all of this goes to building the reputation. And why is the reputation important? The reputation of the faculty is important so that first of all, you'll attract the best students to this university. And secondly, in the research context, you're in a position to attract the right people to come and work with you at your university to build research even further. So all of these things build to creating a reputation of the institution to be a strong institution which is delivering, and others will gravitate towards you to join in on the good news story. Okay, so that's important. Okay, now the third theme of this paper, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about, is because we need to provide management to support the leadership of research in institutions. Everything I've talked about up to this point has been about, well, what would Artie do, what would Yodi do, what would Ari do in building up the research of that institution. They can't do it all by themselves. They try, and they do a very good job, but they need a management system underneath all of that to provide the resources and provide them with information, provide them with time, etc., to do what they need to do to improve the reputation of the faculty. All of the things that I talked about. So in this, there's a whole list of management things which need to happen at the faculty level, at the institution level, to support the efforts that your leaders make on your behalf. First of all, organisational structure. We've just talked about that. Is the departmental structure appropriate, etc.? But there are others. And there's no single model, it needs to be appropriate for the plans and financial capacity. But within the organisational structure, you need, what level of autonomy do we have for our senior managers? What can a head of department do that they can do by themselves versus seeking approval of the dean before they do it? What level of autonomy do those people have? Because if they do have some autonomy, then it takes that responsibility away from Artie and the dean and so on. But they can keep an oversight of it, but they don't necessarily have to sign every piece of paper that the head of department wants to initiate. Organisational structure is also important for developing critical mass and discipline scope. That comes back to considerations of how interdisciplinary do we want to be, how flexible can we be in our organisational structure to allow these things to develop. One of the barriers to interdisciplinary or interdepartmental collaboration, one of the barriers to that is the head of department A has a budget, head of department B has a budget, and they don't want to have any money leaking from A to B or B to A. Okay? So they resist efforts to cross the boundary between department A and department B, naturally enough. So the organisational structure and the way all of that management is handled is important for facilitating interdisciplinary collaboration, which comes down to what authority does a senior manager have in a particular department. Executive and management operations, these should be based on the need and experience of the staff. There needs to be very good definition of roles and responsibilities. And I've just alluded to what does a head of department actually do, what can they do, what authority do they have. And of course there's the issue of meeting the requirements of the governing body and the regulators. You always have to prepare reports, and so the management structure should be positioned well to develop those reports for the leadership. Clearly in any sized organisation there'll be a range of committees which help to distribute this workload and have the discussions. And these are responsible for communication and sharing of information, development of policies and procedures, and of course there needs to be a proper balance. Too many committee meetings are a waste of time. Not enough committee meetings mean you don't get the work done effectively. So you've got to balance all of that. And there's a whole series of presentations we could give on what makes a good meeting, but we won't dwell on that now. Okay, so management to support leadership of research in institutions. In the paper, if you go and read it, you'll find table 1, and I've identified 31 primary activities for management and administration within an organisational unit, which underpin the research effort. In summary, you need a research office. And the sorts of things the research office will do is provide research support. They can help with research translation and commercialisation. Where your research staff don't have the skills to do that, you need to have people on board who can do that with them, the support staff. You need people who are skilled in financial management, asset management, and performance data recording and analysis. You shouldn't be asking the researchers to do all of that because they're busy with their ideas and how they want to do the work and what are the risks of their research process actually working, etc. So there need to be staff who are trained to support the research effort, and that should be in a research office. That could be a research office in the university, or it could be a smaller research office in the faculty with these sorts of staff activities going on. Okay, let's move on to leadership of researchers in institution. This is where we're talking about how do the leaders interact with the people who are doing the research. As I mentioned earlier, induction of research students is very important. They need training in methods, regulation, literature analysis, mentoring, etc., experience outside academe, and a quality of supervision of those students needs to be something which needs to be identified. Do you have a register of people who are qualified to be a research supervisor? What are the rules which underpin whether you can be a research supervisor or not? Do you have those processes? So that's a very important aspect of student life as a researcher. Early career researchers, issues around appointment, development and career structures. So the leaders of the faculty need to identify what things are necessary, and this series of workshops and this program has been one element for early career researchers to do with their development and potentially their career structures. Okay, so it's happening. But this sort of thing needs to happen, I believe, quite consistently and repeated over time because you get new people coming in and careers develop, etc. For established researchers, so these are the more senior people who are, as we say, more mature or established in their research effort, there needs to be recognition and reward. So the leaders of the faculty need to be recognising and rewarding the people who've been achieving good research outcomes. And one of the ones which I think is very important is the intangible thank you. How often is it said in a faculty, thank you? Not very often, okay? It's been my experience throughout my career, very rarely is it said thank you. I can remember when I first became a Vice-Chancellor, there was a Vice-Chancellor's residence, which was a lovely old established property at the university. I had to live there because it was part of my conditions of employment to live in this lovely house. It was so hard. I really struggled to do it, but you know, I had to. So what I did was when the research grants were announced by the government, and there were various people at the institution who had won a competitive grant from a government funding agency, my wife and I put on drinks at the Vice-Chancellor's residence in the garden, lovely afternoon, 5 o'clock, invited these people who had won their grant with their wife or their partner or their whatever. They came along and we had a lovely garden party and I said thank you. They fell over. They just didn't know how to respond. The Vice-Chancellor had A, invited them to the Vice-Chancellor's house, and B, said thank you for winning the grant. They were really pleased, and days afterwards they came up to me and said thank you very much for saying thank you. It meant so much to them that the culture of the place started to... they had come from a culture where the Vice-Chancellor was always saying no. No, you can't do that. No, you can't spend that money. No, you can't do this. You can't do that. Whereas I came along and I said, thank you. You've done a great job for winning a grant for the institution. And so the whole atmosphere started to change as a result of that. So I did it again a year later and a year later and so on. So it became a regular event to say thank you to the staff. And it's the intangible thing which can help the leadership create an atmosphere where things are positive. There are tangible ways of helping things with salary, infrastructure support, travel, workload, flexibility. We'll get to that in a moment with more technical detail. And promotion, obviously, is a very important incentive within the structure. But it has to be realistic promotion, and it has to be assessed properly, peer review assessment. For everyone who's doing research, they need to be defined roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and again, induction to the institution. Not only do we need to do the induction, you need to tell them why they need the induction. The rationale for teaching people about research integrity. Why do we need to worry about research integrity? Well, if research integrity doesn't happen, then the reputation of the institution as a whole is diminished. These things here, transparency and fairness, if you're going to recognise and reward, that needs to be based on evidence. If the leader happens to like somebody particularly, you know, you enjoy their company, they're great company, they do things that you want them to do, but they don't actually publish any papers or they don't do that, and then you reward them for research productivity, then you've lost the credibility of your leadership because there is no transparency and no credibility there. Okay, so that's what I mean. And transparency and fairness, everybody needs to be able to compete for promotion on the rules, on the evidence, so that's important. I've identified 23 primary activities for management to support all of that activity in the paper, and here we go down to, well, where does all of this happen? It can happen in places such as the Postgraduate Research Office, a Personnel Office or a Human Resources Office. These are the sorts of things which the staff of that office need to do to support the leader of the faculty. They're looking after the human resources of the institution. So that's very important. So we get then to the last theme, which is all about personal behaviours and qualities of research leaders and managers. And I've identified 10. There was a slide yesterday or the day before, which was a similar one to this. And I'd like to get a copy of, I think, Artie's slide, your slide, Artie. You had a list, I think, about 12 qualities and principles. I've identified 10, which I'll just flash up. So we won't deal with these in any great detail, but these are the behaviours which I think are very important. So these are the things I think leaders should be thinking about in terms of their personal behaviour when they go through the leadership process. Okay? So that's just a brief summary of that paper, and you can read more detail in the paper if you'd like to. So let's move on to potential strategies. Now, these potential strategies I've seen in use in various institutions, and what I'm drawing on here are some international publications which have identified things which many institutions do to try and improve research performance. There's a lot of words here, but I think you'll have access to these slides anyway later on. But basically, an HR strategy includes recruitment of new people, align recruitment strategy to priority areas, reinvigorate, that is incentivise, reward and recognise research performance via promotion, salary and other benefits, etc. But that needs to be in the context of the plan, the strategy moving forward, and so on. We need to train or induct or develop people, implement faculty development strategies, reorientate, encourage involvement in new fields or large-scale interdisciplinary research teams via incentive schemes. Again, an incentive scheme needs to be developed to get people to change their behaviour to do something different. People won't necessarily just do it by themselves. Some people will. Some people will see the advantage and they'll go off and be proactive about it. But quite often an incentive scheme is required. And enabling. And what we mean by this is enhancing research facilities and opportunities, providing opportunities for people to go to meetings, conferences, interact with other people and so on. So it's enabling strategies. You can see there's a whole range of things there, including family-friendly workplaces and a women's register, for example. So when women have babies and they have to take time away from the workplace to look after babies, then that needs to be recognised and facilitated. So there needs to be that positive activity going on. Here's another one, institutional policy, investing, establishing appropriate organisational structures, apply performance indicators, limited number of research priorities, clusters and centres, aligning funding, strategic alliances with other institutions, leadership and a culture of scholarship. These are some of the things I've talked about in some detail earlier, so I'm not going to dwell on those, but these are good practice initiatives to develop research capacity. So you need to start thinking about these, because in a few minutes after a break we'll be asking you to identify these sorts of strategies that you think would be useful in your situation. So we'll probably leave these slides available so you can just have a look over your shoulder and refresh your memory about some of these things. I won't dwell on them now. Here's another one, range of incentives offered to attract and retain researchers. As you can see, things like favourable working conditions, financial incentives, professional development and others. This is another interesting one. The last line here is another interesting one. Joint appointments across a number of organisations. Is there another organisation which would benefit from benefit somebody if they had a joint appointment? Clearly the hospital is one situation here, hospital, university, and I'm sure it happens. Okay, so this is the result of a survey that was done across 25 institutions, and the staff in those institutions were asked to identify what was most important to them. So significant research training activities, well, obviously a PhD program, but mentoring came up very strongly. Nearly 60% of respondents identified mentoring as being important. Help with financial management, research skills and methodologies. Project management was lower down, and presentation skills. Obviously most people think that they can present something very, very well. Thank you very much. I don't need any more training in that. Well, possibly not. But at least we might provide an opportunity for that training if people would like to take it up. Incentives and assistance. What was the most important thing? I think, Adi, you might need to look at this one. Research time within the academic year is the strongest one here. 65% of people think that that's most important. Give people time to do research. We've heard that repeatedly, haven't we, Yodi, over the days. You don't have any time for this. So something needs to be thought about, structured, deal with that issue. Travel funds, targeted grants, salary increase, facilities, etc., all of these sorts of things. They were identified as being strategies which would help people identify a better positive outlook towards doing research.
What would be the, in practical terms, what kind of, in practical terms, what kind of strategies to free up time for the lecturers to do more research?
Well, we'll pose this as a question for the participants. What strategies do you think would work best? Okay. Okay, I'll give you an example. This can range from a short-term issue through to a long-term issue. I'll start with the short-term. The short-term can be, we will organise that all of your teaching is done within a certain period of the year, and that there is a period of each year where you don't have any teaching responsibility, and you can spend that time doing your research. That's one. In the longer term, what we can do is we can say to you, in 5 years' time, we will give you a full year free of teaching. You have a full year to do nothing else than do research. Okay? And in an extreme example of that, you're doing so well in research, even though you're doing a lot of teaching, what we're going to do is to move you into a position which is a research-only position, and we'll give you 5 years of research-only time. Okay? Now, you're probably thinking this is just not possible. And that's where it comes back to the leader being able to manage the resources and manage the time of the people that they're working with. And that comes back to a very early point that I made, and that is, do you have a map of the activities of all the staff in the faculty? Because unless you have that map, you can't identify where somebody could take up more teaching responsibility on behalf to free up the time for somebody else to do more research. So it's all of that staff management responsibility. So that's an example, okay? I just included this. This is, you probably can't see all the words on this slide, but this came from a report which was done on employer demand for researchers in Australia. And they looked at the incentives offered to attract and retain research employees. And the point of this is just to show you that the red lines here refer to when a researcher is being attracted into business versus when a person is being attracted into a university. And you can see that the red lines here, which is a percentage scale, these are the sorts of incentives which are being used in a university compared to in a business. It's different. Different environment, different reasons, etc. There's no point in dwelling on this particular slide, but let me just run through. Accelerated promotion program, not really that important in business, but a little bit more important in university. Access to research materials and information resources, that's pretty common in business, but we really need more of that in the university sector here, you know, good libraries and facilities, etc. Let me pick another one which is a little bit different. International collaboration opportunities, that's not so important in business because, as we heard yesterday, businesses are naturally more business in confidence. So travel and all that sort of thing is not so important there, or collaboration, but in the university here, 80% of it is collaboration. The incentive is around collaboration. So these are the sorts of things which you need to think about. Time to prepare publications, not very important in industry, whereas in the university that's very important. Another thing which I just wanted to ask you to think about. Don't worry about the numbers here. It's only a prompt for me to remember what I was going to say. And that is, for you to become really, really strong in research, you need good English. Okay? You need to publish in international journals in English. So the question that arises is, what assistance is provided to younger researchers and even more experienced researchers to make sure that their English is accurate and their English is good to write a good international quality paper? I'm asking the question, I'm not projecting any answer here. I don't know. I'm just asking, is it something you need to think about? And why I thought about it was that I looked at this English language scientific articles by authors from Southeast Asia and Oceania from 1998 to 2008, 28,000 papers in 2008 in Australia, naturally enough, English-speaking country, Indonesia 650. Cambodia 75. New Zealand, you know, clearly this is dependent on the population size, the number of researchers, etc., etc. So don't worry about the numbers so much. It was just the proportions here that that I was intrigued about, and I just wanted to ask you the question, is English language training something you need to think about from a faculty perspective in terms of preparing papers for international publication? I'm not going to dwell on it. It's something I'm asking you to think about. A few final points. Networks are important because the outcome can be greater than the sum of the parts. We talked about collaboration the other day. Critical mass. This is having enough people contributing to a major research question which will actually lead to something dramatic happening. Mentoring and development are important. Linkage with stakeholders, I've mentioned. Participation in the system, I've said this before. Once you start to be active, then you need to contribute into the system to help others in the same system. That can be internal in the department, it could be internal in the university, but it could also be in the national granting systems, etc., etc. Keep an eye on the bigger picture. That means look outside the institution, make sure that you're following what other people are doing, what other institutions are doing, to see what advantage you might have or where they might have an advantage over you. Remember, it is a competition. And be prepared to change. That's most important. Okay. So there we have it. I'm going to stop there. Is it time
for discussion, if there are some questions?
We can have some questions and then we'll break for a morning tea, and then Yodi will ask you, or he will invite you to work in small groups to identify some of the priority areas out of what I've described for you. So, happy to take questions.
Okay. Questions? Pak Rusdi? Yes.
Yeah, I've been in Japan. It's much more flexible. You can move to other places to be professors and things like that. While here, the system is much more rigid in the way that if you are already a civil servant in a university, it will be much harder to move to the other part. So, which makes that the incentive should be, I think, much earlier to these, graduates, early graduates from the undergraduate students or master student or PhD students, to attract them to be researchers in the university, so that you get the best researchers, and then you develop or try to increase the capacity and going on. Because if you try to attack senior researchers in this country, I think, in a way to be the part of faculty members, it will be much more difficult. Of course, if it is collaboration, that will be fine, but for attracting and become a faculty members, I think that would be quite complicated. And the second problem that I want to address also is that regarding the clinical settings, in Indonesia, I speak, for example, in neurology in my department, You mentioned before in the reorientations of the department based on research theme could be a good idea sometimes. But in the clinical department and all over Indonesia, I think there is one problem is that when you are in the neurology, you need to have some things, sub-department or anything that you mentioned, it's a sub-specialty or something which should follow the collegium rule. So the collegium have some rules that you need to have this sub-department, this sub-department, and sub-department that you need to follow, which we discussed a few times ago in Solo. So this creates a big problem. It creates, in one department could be like 20 sub-department or something, which create a big problem because no human resources for that and things like that. So I just want to address that, yes, there is an idea to change this is actually much more complicated in clinical settings because we have to follow the collegium rules that you have to have certain things under your department. Maybe that's the thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that things are different. As far as attracting staff, and it's interesting what you've told me about the public service structure, etc., etc. So my first reaction to that is, what level of communication is going on between the institution and the government to potentially try and influence that situation? In other words, can the government change the way it does things in determining how public servants will be distributed across different institutions, disciplines, whatever? Is there some way the government could make that a little bit more flexible so that we could eventually get in a few years' time to something which makes it easier for people to move, to create a better environment, a more collaborative arrangement, for example? This would come back to this issue of joint appointments across institutions. I imagine what you're saying is a limitation on your ability to do that. and I understand that. So my first approach would be to see what flexibility there is at a very, very high level, to see if we could change the governance structure to make it more flexible. If that's not going to change, then you've got to think of other strategies at the institutional level, where you potentially have some flexibility. Now, you've quite rightly put to me that appointing new people is a difficult strategy. Okay, so if that's difficult, then let's think about some other strategy which might come some way to achieving what you want to achieve. And it could be possible that if you talk in multidisciplinary research teams, it could be possible that a professor in Department A could actually be asked to move to be a professor in Department B, to create a team of people around a common interest in that area, inside the institution. Is that going to be possible or not? I don't know, but that's the sort of thinking that you might need to put in place, where there's a constraint in the system and you need to find a way to get around that somehow. Not a very good answer, but I really don't understand fully the circumstances you're talking about to provide you with a better example than that. Then maybe that's the best you could think about doing. I mean, I've seen the same problem in Vietnam, for example. Vietnam is a very, very controlled higher education environment. Very difficult to do anything different. And there have been big international reports done to advise the government on how to make it easier for academic institutions to work better. But still progress is not as rapid as some people, even in Vietnam, would like to see. So you're not alone in these sorts of issues, but I think it takes a conversation from the institution going up to the government to say, look, this is a constraint on our system which is not helping us in an international competition to improve research. Make the government aware of it. That would be my message.
Still talking is joint appointment between two departments, and also joint department between faculties under the same university. Yeah. So, for example, a colleague of us, she's OBGY, we all know, but she's in the process of getting the professorship in medical education. So, in that sense, maybe this will also trigger in a positive way that she will have a joint appointment in these two departments. Now, the mechanism is still unclear. This is something that we are discussing. And also between faculties. For example, in the Faculty of Medicine, we have a lot of work on insurance, for example. In some areas, we really need faculty members from the Faculty of Economy and Business to be there and to work with us. So this is also a few examples. On the recruitment, I think generally, personally, I would say that recruitment is weak. Within the department structure, Alan, as just for your information, that at the moment, I think we are undergoing a very big change also. With what we actually propose is having the school structure under the Faculty of Medicine. The Faculty of Medicine will become Faculty of Medicine, Nursing, and Public Health. And under that, we wanted to introduce the school level, medical school, nutrition, public health and nursing. But this is still in the process. And what's happening is that the number of the departments will be increasing from 26 to I think 30 something, 34, 35. And this is, I would not change that, but then it's a big question on given this context, how do we encourage this multidisciplinary research? I mean, that's a question to all of us. But that's the way that the structure of the department will go.
Is the structure more dependent on teaching or research, or teaching and research?
I think it's more on teaching. Yeah? It's more on teaching, and it's more of the professionals for the clinicians. And
so, is it a structure which is designed to give people encouragement that they are members of a group which is not too big? In other words, they've got their power base within a small relatively small department, I mean, how big are these departments going to be?
Varies. The requirement is that a department has six person working.
6?
Full-time, yeah, 6 full-time. And some departments could be very big. For example, the surgery, maybe these are the big departments. And public health will be split it into 4 departments. So it varies. Some departments would have very large master program, for example. And some even division has clinical specialty training. So variation is big.
Yeah. Each one of them has a head of department, each one of them has a departmental manager, each one of them has X, Y, Z. It just tells me that the bureaucracy of administering the university is too heavy. There are too many rules that have to be met, which could be joined together and make one rule for 10. Okay, it covers 10 issues, one rule. Reporting against it is only one report instead of 10 reports, etc., etc. So I would be looking very, very seriously at what is the administrative load which is making it complicated to make sure that your faculty has 32 departments. Okay? When I finished after a year, I designed a university that had 2 faculties and 10 departments, with nobody losing a job. Okay, why did we do that? Because the feedback that I got from the staff when I first went to that university, they said to me, we are over-administered. There is too much administration going on here. So I looked at it, and yes, there were too many small departments. So we merged departments into a new structure of 10 departments. So to go from 26 to 32 within one faculty, I'm asking some very serious questions in my head as to what is the rationale for doing that. Is it helping? I understand about the division between clinical disciplines, and that will determine you'll have departments. But how many, why do we need 4 departments of public health? This serious question for me. Do we need 4? Is it because we have 4 professors of public health? Or
because you have good performance in very large master programs. And I think if could be compared to other universities, this is small. In other universities, public health is faculty of public health, which we don't want to go to that direction, because we believe we want to train medical doctors and not public health.
I'm not going to make any more comment on this because I don't know all the facts. Okay.
But the rest, Alan, it's been a very sometimes it can be very emotional exercise in a way. So even those who, for example, the other extreme, even those who doesn't produce papers, doesn't perform so much, they wouldn't want to be merged.
I know.
Merging is is a.
I understand that. There's a big emotional attachment to what is currently the case, and a very big emotional reaction to change. But sometimes you have to change. And sometimes you, as a leader, you've got to be really strong about accepting what people say. When I restructured the university down to 16 departments down to 10, I merged some departments, which meant that the other thing I did at the time was that instead of having each head of department elected by the staff of the department, I made the head of department position a 5-year contract position which was advertised externally. Okay, so that changed the whole notion of what the academic department is. So we brought in people who were, some internal appointments were made, some external appointments were made in that process. So that was very important to change the ethos of how the university worked. You may not have that flexibility to do it that way, but I think there's an issue in there. As I say, I wouldn't want to comment any further on your structure until I saw what the numbers were, how big were the departments going to be, why were the departments going to be of that structure. But my encouragement and my general philosophy is to reduce the number of administrative units that you've got if you are the Associate Dean Research in this faculty and you've got 32 departments reporting to you for research activity, you're going to be run off your feet. Do you have a deputy? Do you have a deputy ADR?
Actually, my deputy is not for research. So the deputy is on more on the collaboration. Well, maybe to turn it into a challenge. So how can I make a mechanism where to make it easier to get there?
It comes down to what authority and what autonomy is going to be held at the head of department level. What can they do, which they just tell you about the outcomes. They tell you about their plan and they tell you about the outcome, and that you can let them get on with the work. That's the question for you. But just the number of reports that are coming directly to you is going to be very challenging to manage that in terms of time and capacity to fully understand exactly what's going on.
And so on. I think most of these 32 are actually, clinical department, which is based on the clinical service that they do. I think it's, in my opinion, it's quite rational because,
okay,
it's a clinical setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to have your opinion. How if the organization, your university have two systems? I mean, they have the departmental structure, particularly for organizing the teaching aspect. And then they also have the different system for the research organization. They have research office in the university. They have their structure in the faculty, and they build a small research group in the faculty level that can be multidisciplinary. I want to have your opinion about that.
So I'm in favour of that sort of structure being developed, where you have themes of research and people contribute their research activities into those themes. In order for that to work, you need theme leaders. So immediately you've now got a problem, because you've got a person responsible for a research theme who is not a head of department, but has to interact with all of the different heads of departments whose staff are contributing to that research theme. What power and authority do you give a theme leader in managing the research effort, which is no longer the role of the head of department? And who does the theme leader report to? And I suggested, I think over dinner last night with Adi, that the theme leaders on such a structure should report through to the Associate Dean Research. They should not be reporting to the different departments. So there's a different reporting structure. The theme leaders may get a budget allocation from Adi as Associate Dean Research to give those theme leaders some autonomy over some distribution of funding within their theme, which might tackle some of the staff development issues that we talked about here on building a research effort. So the theme leaders, so you're setting up a second level, not a second level, a second type of organisational structure which is matrixed over the top of the departmental, the fundamental departmental structure. And if that's acceptable to the staff of the faculty, then that's one way to move ahead. So, I'm positive about it. In fact, I deal with this almost on a daily basis. Another medical research institute that I'm associated with is, in effect, not a very big institution at all. It only has a very small number of staff of its own. But the research effort, which is under the banner of that institute, is in fact drawn from academics who are affiliates. They're affiliated with our institute, but they come from several different academic departments across the university and the hospital. And there are theme leaders for the research, and we fund research activities within those themes via the institute, but these people are employed for their salary purposes by academic departments in the university or hospital. So we're just starting to come up to the issue of whose responsibility is it to monitor the research performance of the staff? Is it the institute or is it the academic department? So in your example, is it the theme leader or is it the head of department? And you have to sort that out. And we're coming up to that issue now. So it's not easy, but that's the way I would see it. I would be encouraging you to give intellectual flexibility in your organisational arrangement to the staff so that they can contribute most to the area which is where they can make the biggest contribution. And try and get an organisational structure which will facilitate that. Yeah.
Very inspiring sessions. So we'll have a 20-minute break and then we'll let you know how we're going to do the group work, okay? So please have your coffee and tea in 20 minutes and come back.